Well, hello and welcome to another in the series of Café Insights. I'm Andrew Vine, the CEO of the Insight Bureau, and today I'm in conversation with Dr. Andrew Freris. Andrew, welcome to Singapore.
It's always a pleasure, Andrew. Thank you.
Andrew has been based in Asia for the last 46 years or so, with experience that has included working with GE Capital, Salomon Brothers, which is where I first met you in '93, I think, Bank of America, and latterly BNP Paribas. So Andrew, now that you've established Econosis as your platform, what keeps you busy these days?
Well, after I've left with BNP Paribas, with whom I was for 14 years, and I did both fixed income and wealth management, I set up my own small advisory consultancy firm, but it is taking off very nicely, and that keeps me busy in a lot of different ways. Because my background experience has been very, very varied. With GT Capital, I did fund management. With Salomon Brothers, I did pure equity. With Bank of America, I did pure corporate banking. And with BNP Paribas, I did fixed income and wealth management.
Right.
So that more or less covers just about all the major areas in investment banking.
Right. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you first of all, just generally, is in terms of the state of the world economy. We've been talking about this with a number of speakers in terms of the game has changed. I mean, a few years ago, it was very much talking about a two-speed economy. A lot of interest in the emerging markets seemed to be steaming ahead, and the developed world being very much in the doldrums. These days, it seems to be a much more complicated story. It seems to be a multi-speed economy. How would you characterize it?
Well, I think the most crucial difference of what's happening now and what has gone in the last, let's say, 20 years is that the key components of the global economy, which is the European Union, Japan, and of course the United States, are so completely unsynchronized, it isn't true. Yeah. Namely, United States is doing macroeconomically well, and it's about to increase interest rates. European Union is doing very poorly, and it has cut, and it will cut again and again interest rates, and so has Japan. So they are asynchronous both on their cyclical economic positions and totally unsynchronized on their monetary policy positions. Same thing, of course, happens in Asia, where individual economies are also very different in their economic cycles. And of course, Asia, over the last 12 months, pick your choice. I could give you some central banks that were increasing, some central banks that were decreasing, and central banks that were keeping interest rates constant. So it is an incredibly mixed and diverse picture. I would even go to the extreme of saying global, most definitely not. Yep. Economies, well, depends what you mean, okay, but synchronization on their economic cycle, most definitely not.
So how would you characterize the emerging markets? I know that lumping them all together within BRIC doesn't seem to make much sense to people these days. When you think about them, the only two that seem to be interesting these days is India and China.
Correct.
Brazil and
actually,
Russia.
Even if we cast our net a little bit wider and we took in Latin America, and Latin America primarily is Mexico,
yep,
which of course is a client state of the United States, and Brazil, which is primarily driven. It is a huge domestic market, but also, of course, with a considerable export exposure. And Brazil is doing very poorly right now, not because the United States is doing poorly or Japan is doing poorly. It's a combination of domestic and external market considerations. So the answer is yes. There are very few specific emerging markets that are doing very well, and a large number that are either doing indifferently or they are, again, in different positions on their phases. China and India are two very good examples.
We'll come back to Asia a little bit later. But you are from Greece, so I must ask you this question about the EU. How do you view the EU at the moment? I mean, it seems to be a region with a very long, drawn-out problem that needs to be fixed.
I'll split it up in three parts. Greece, in a sense, it is a very distorted mirror to put up face Europe. But in that distorted mirror, there are quite a lot of distortions that are European and not just Greek. In other words, an inflexible labor market, economies that are absolutely packed with privileged groups and monopolistic, non-competing groups, and of course an economy, in the case of Greece in particular, which is hugely imbalanced, namely, has got a very large service sector and virtually nothing else. And of course an economy that has got external imbalances and domestic imbalances. So you can always see parts of Italy, parts of Spain, part of Portugal, except, as I said, Greece is an exaggerated caricature of all that bewails and befalls the European Union.
Seems to be quite a big split between the north and the south, the pigs, as we call them, if you like, Portugal,
exactly.
Italy, Spain,
and
Greece.
That's part of the distortion, namely that you have very, very different economies with some of them with very common problems, but some of them with some very common advantages that are not equally shared. And as I said, Greece is a particularly good caricature example of what befalls and bewails the European Union right now.
You're obviously following very carefully the oil prices, what's happening in commodities.
We'll split the commodities in two parts: soft commodities, which are agricultural commodities, which are driven primarily by weather. And here, of course, we have things like wheat and soy and to some extent corn that are in oversupply. Namely, the crops have been very good, the future crops are likely to be very good, and that has kept the prices down. And there is very little that can be done here because of course weather cannot be controlled. And then we have the hard commodities, and the two primary good examples, it's oil and iron ore, both of which have been hit by a large amount of inflow of supply at the time that the demand for those was either flat or falling. And one of the major culprits, if you want, in the case of iron ore has been the drop in demand coming out of China as China slowed down. And one of the major culprits when we come to oil is of course the progressive but then accelerated coming into line shale production in the United States, and of course the refusal by the Saudis of cutting back their own supply. So you are having a situation whereby demand kept dropping and supply kept decreasing, and you don't need to be a Nobel Prize winner to point out that that means falling prices.
But that's good for the world economy though, isn't it?
It is good as far as inflation is concerned, and of course it is good as far as potential further pressure is concerned, but of course it's not very good for the producing countries, but then the producing countries are relatively limited. Yeah, it has hit Australia very, very hard, but then of course neither the European Union nor Japan are producers of hard or soft commodities, so they are enjoying, if that is the expression, the benefits of lower prices, which might have come at a time that the central banks would have wanted to see accelerating rather than decelerating inflation. But there you go. You can have a...
Closer to home here in Singapore with ASEAN, we hear a lot about India and China, but we hear progressively more about some of the economies in Southeast Asia.
I must admit, I look at the macroeconomics only to the extent that this is going to tell me something or help me make money for my clients in the equity markets. So I think it is almost irrelevant to say, look, China still continues to have the best macroeconomics in Asia at the time that this is not going to help its equity performance. Equally, telling you that the macroeconomics, let's say in Thailand, are not the most attractive, but still the Thai equity market is one of the best performer, possibly the second or third best performer market consistently for now a year and a half. So I'm interested in a combination of two, and of course it now falls very easily to point out that the macro in India are not particularly good, but it still is one of the best performers because of the expectations of further cutting interest rates and expectations which I'm afraid are unlikely to be fulfilled of a reformist, liberalizing policies by the Modi administration. Thailand still has got a military dictatorship, the Teflon economy, nothing sticks, and continues to perform well. And the macros are now progressively looking better. And Philippines, that clearly almost can do no wrong because it still is possibly the best performing market in Asia with good but not outrageously good macroeconomics. Bottom line is look at a combination of the two, and I'm coming down very rapidly that the markets that I would like my clients to be in for next year as far as equities is concerned is India, but with a short-term view, in other words no longer than 1 year, because I don't think we're going to get the expectations fulfilled out of the reforms of the Modi administration. Secondly, Philippines. Third, Thailand. And then last but not least, Indonesia. Some macroeconomic problems remaining there, but I still think ultimately an economy that is likely to perform well and therefore likely for the equity markets to perform. Bottom line, I like India, Philippines, Thailand, and Indonesia with a question mark. China, I need to wait for another half a year or more before the macros are substantially supportive of earnings before the market flies again.
Great. Well, it's always good to hear someone stick their neck out and give us a view. Thank you very much, Andrew.
It's always a pleasure.
And see you again here very soon.
Looking forward to it.
Cheers.